In the vibrant heart of Istanbul, where East meets West, a bizarre show once captivated Turkish television every night. The show featured scantily clad women with bleached blonde hair swaying to the beats of pop music, while a suave man in designer suits passionately preached about Islamic values. But this wasn't your typical late-night entertainment. This was the surreal public face of one of Turkey's most infamous cults, led by the mysterious Adnan Oktar. Yet, the real story lurked behind the cameras, a story of twisted control, abuse, and deceit. What was portrayed as a feminist movement was a far cry from the fight for equality. It was a disturbing concoction of religion, spirituality, and pseudoscience. And at the center of it all, Adnan Oktar, whose empire crumbled as he was sentenced to nearly 10,000 years in prison. But how did this cult rise to such prominence, dominating Turkish airwaves and public discourse? To unravel this tale, we must go back in time and explore the origins of Adnan Oktar's astonishing rise to power. Welcome to Cults Uncovered. This is the true story of the Islamic sex cult led by Adnan Oktar. Born in 1956 in Ankara, Turkey's capital, Adnan Oktar grew up in what he described as a relatively affluent secular family. Like many young Turks of his generation, Oktar was caught between the country's secular traditions and a rising tide of Islamic conservatism. Oktar's journey was anything but ordinary. In 1979, he moved to Istanbul to study interior design at Mimar Sinan University. It was here, amid the political turmoil of 1980s Turkey, that he began his transformation from an ordinary student into a charismatic religious leader. Oktar immersed himself in the works of Said Nursi, a Kurdish Islamic scholar whose writings sought to reconcile Islam with modern science and Western philosophy. Nursi's ideas would profoundly shape Oktar's worldview and his future teachings. He soon went from being a mere apprentice to becoming the voice of the doctrines himself. By the early 1980s, Oktar had begun disseminating his views on Islam to young university students from socially connected, wealthy Istanbul families. Between 20 and 30 of these followers formed a group around Oktar between 1982 and 1984. Soon thereafter, the group started recruiting newly converted private high school students who also came from affluent backgrounds. Oktar's message was a potent mix of Islamic conservatism, Turkish nationalism, and pseudoscientific theories about evolution and creation. He argued against Marxism, communism, and materialistic philosophy, but attached special importance to refuting evolution and Darwinism, as he believed they were being used to promote materialism and atheism. It was something new and above all provocative, and that started to draw attention, but maybe too much attention. In 1986, Oktar's controversial views and aggressive rhetoric led to his arrest and subsequent charges of making propaganda with the aim of weakening or destroying national sentiments. He spent 19 months in detention, including a 10-month stint in the criminal ward at Bakirköy Hospital, where he was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and obsessive-compulsive personality disorder. Oktar, however, dismissed these diagnoses as political ploys, insisting he was a victim of persecution for his beliefs. Eventually, he was released, and instead of staying quiet, Oktar doubled down on his efforts to spread his message. In 1990, he founded the Science Research Foundation, BAV, which would become the primary vehicle for his ideas. The BAV held conferences and seminars promoting creationism and attacking Darwinism, which Oktar saw as the root of many social and political problems. And it worked. Oktar's followers abandoned their overtly Islamic garb in favor of designer clothing and proclaimed themselves supporters of Ataturk, the secularist founder of modern Turkey. This was a strategic move that allowed them to appeal to a broader audience while maintaining their conservative Islamic core. In 1995, Oktar founded the Foundation for Protection of National Values, MDKV, expanding his network to include other Turkish nationalist organizations. He began publishing prolifically, writing under the pen name Harun Yahya. In 1996, he wrote and published The Holocaust Deception, and as you might predict from its title, it was as controversial as you would imagine. In this book, he denied the Nazi genocide of Jews. Later, he realized that this book would cause problems for him in building relationships with Jewish leaders and Israeli politicians, so he tried to reverse things. 10 years later, in 2006, he published The Holocaust Violence, where he acknowledged the genocide. After this, he denied having written the first book. This flip-flopping was just a glimpse into the contradictions that defined Oktar's life. We might be getting a bit ahead of ourselves, but this just highlights the kind of walking contradiction we're dealing with. As the 2000s unfolded, Oktar's organization went global. His most ambitious project was The Atlas of Creation, an 800-page book purporting to disprove evolution through glossy photographs of fossils. In 2007, Oktar sent thousands of unsolicited copies to schools and universities across Europe and the United States. The book was widely mocked by scientists for its numerous errors and misrepresentations. One infamous example was a photograph purportedly showing a 125-million-year-old fossil dragonfly, which was actually a modern fishing lure complete with a metal hook. Despite the ridicule from the scientific community, the Atlas of Creation succeeded in spreading Oktar's ideas far beyond Turkey's borders. He became a prominent voice in the Islamic creationist movement, offering a Muslim alternative to Christian fundamentalist arguments against evolution. In 2010, Oktar was selected as one of the top 50 of the 500 most influential Muslims in the world by the Royal Islamic Strategic Studies Center of Jordan in recognition of his works on creationism in an Islamic context and other extensively distributed publications on Islamic topics. With this newfound support, Oktar launched his own television channel, A9 TV, in 2011. It was here that his cult took on its most bizarre and recognizable form. Oktar's nightly talk shows featured a rotating cast of young women he called his kittens, dressed in revealing clothing and heavy makeup. Now here's where things become ever stranger. These programs were a surreal mix of religious discussion, political commentary, and pop culture. Oktar's show discussed topics such as Kim Kardashian, Islamic principles, and conspiracy theories about the British deep state. During the show, his kittens nodded along and occasionally broke into dance routines. It was weird, to say the least. As you may expect, conservative Muslims saw this as a perversion of Islamic values, but it also attracted a significant following, particularly in the Arab world where A9 TV was broadcast via satellite. Now, how can anybody justify the presence of scantily clad women on a show of that nature? Well, he argued that the Quran doesn't require women to cover their hair. He claimed to be promoting a modern, tolerant version of Islam that embraced beauty and sexuality, a feminist Islam, he called it. But behind the glitzy TV facade, a darker reality was taking shape. As Oktar's public profile grew, so did allegations of abuse within his organization. Former members began to come forward with disturbing stories of exploitation, manipulation, and abuse. One of the most shocking revelations came from Ebru Simsek, a former beauty queen who claimed Oktar had become obsessed with her after seeing her on TV in 1994. Simsek said Oktar tried to recruit her into his group with promises of luxury and fame. When she refused and tried to distance herself, Simsek found herself subjected to a campaign of harassment. Oktar allegedly filed over 300 defamation lawsuits against her, making her life so unbearable that she eventually fled to the United States. Simsek later told Turkish media, "If you shot it as a movie, they would say it's too exaggerated, they wouldn't watch it." Other former members described a cult-like environment where Oktar exerted total control over his followers' lives. They were isolated from their families, a common thing among the cults, required to sever ties with the outside world, and subjected to constant surveillance. Especially the women in the group faced particular pressures. Many reported being coerced into sexual relationships with Oktar and other male members. Some said they were forced to undergo plastic surgery to conform to Oktar's ideals of beauty. The cult's inner workings were shrouded in secrecy, protected by Oktar's aggressive use of libel laws to silence critics. Of course, he knew he was doing something wrong, but he had already tasted power and wasn't going to let it go so easily. Between 2005 and 2015, he filed more than 5,000 lawsuits against individuals for defamation. These legal actions led to the blocking of numerous websites in Turkey, including that of Richard Dawkins, a British evolutionary biologist who criticized Oktar's work. His lawsuits entirely led to the blocking of WordPress blogging website in Turkey. This aggressive use of libel laws effectively stifled public debate about Oktar's organization, making it difficult for journalists and researchers to investigate and report on the cult's activities. For years, Oktar seemed untouchable. His combination of political connections, legal intimidation, and cult-like devotion from his followers allowed him to weather numerous scandals and investigations. Despite his seemingly invincible position, Oktar's world began to crumble like the house of cards. On July 11, 2018, Turkish police launched a massive raid on Oktar's compound, arresting him and over 160 of his followers on charges of forming a criminal enterprise, use of minors, fraud, and attempted political and military espionage. As Oktar was led away by police, he told journalists that the charges were a conspiracy by the British deep state. He claimed, "They are thinking of covering the whole region with Christianity. They targeted me because they saw me as the effective inhibitor of this game." But the raid on Oktar's properties uncovered a disturbing cache of incriminating evidence. Police found nearly 70,000 birth control pills, which Oktar claimed were used to treat skin disorders and menstrual problems. However, prosecutors alleged they were used to prevent pregnancy in the women he abused. With so much incriminating evidence, it was more likely that this was the real reason. But now the police finally had him in their grasp. And so in September 2019, one of the most sensational trials in Turkish history began. Over 200 defendants faced charges, and hundreds of witnesses testified about their experiences in the cult. One of the most disturbing was the so-called turnstile system within the cult. According to testimony from former members, new female recruits were required to have sex with male members of the organization as part of their initiation. But that wasn't the worst part, unfortunately. The group maintained a scoreboard, with male members competing to see who could have sex with the most women, and those with lower scores were accused of being gay. And being gay was another sin. That system of abuse had two objectives: on one hand, obviously, to control the members, and on the other, to gather compromising material in case it needed to be used as blackmail. And no, the abuse wasn't just sexual. The cult had an obsession with physical appearance, and this pressure was particularly strong on the women. They were forced to undergo surgeries to fix what Oktar thought was wrong. This included everything from nose jobs and breast implants to extensive facial reconstructions, sometimes performed by questionable surgeons or without post-operative supervision. One survivor recounted that she was forced to undergo a nose job without anesthesia, all under the orders of Adnan Oktar. And while much of the public attention focused on the abuse allegations, the trial also revealed the extent of the cult's financial crimes. There was evidence of a complex network of shell companies and fraudulent businesses used to launder money and evade taxes. The cult members were coerced into signing over their assets to the organization. Some were forced to take out loans or max out credit cards to fund the group's activities. And the compromising material they could use for blackmail that we talked about earlier? They actually did use it. They generally blackmailed wealthy and influential individuals, earning millions of dollars from these operations, which helped Oktar maintain his luxurious lifestyle. The world was in shock. How could they have let themselves be controlled by this man? Throughout the proceedings, Oktar always maintained his innocence. He claimed to be the victim of a conspiracy and insisted that all his relationships were consensual. At one point, he bizarrely claimed to have close to 1,000 girlfriends, describing himself as having an overflowing of love for women. But the evidence against him was overwhelming. Victims, financial records, and Oktar's own writings and TV appearances provided enough evidence of his unorthodox beliefs and practices. So on January 11, 2021, after a trial lasting more than 2 years, the court delivered its verdict. Adnan Oktar was found guilty on 10 charges, including leading a criminal gang, abuse of minors, and fraud. The court sentenced Oktar to 1,075 years in prison, 13 other high-ranking members of the cult received a total of 9,803 years in prison between them. In delivering the verdict, the judge cited the overwhelming evidence of systematic fraud and criminal activity within the organization. He noted that Oktar had shown no remorse for his actions and had continued to deny any wrongdoing throughout the trial. He was even so brazen that, at the end of the verdict, his lawyers immediately announced their intention to appeal. They argued that the trial had been unfair and that their client's rights had been violated. Now, it was truly a show. And the ending? Oh, just wait and see. Just when it seemed the story had reached its conclusion, the Turkish Court of Appeal overturned Oktar's conviction on March 15, 2022, citing incomplete prosecution and erroneous assessment as the reasons for its decision, and ordered a retrial of all defendants. Public outrage ensued, fearing Oktar might evade justice or rebuild his empire. But the court kept Oktar and 15 others in custody until the new trial in late 2022. Prosecutors presented much of the same evidence that had been used in the original trial. They also introduced new testimony from additional victims who had come forward since the first verdict. However, there were no other surprising changes. At this point, you might think that justice would fail, given that they were following the same formula as before. But that's where we were all wrong. On November 17, 2022, the court delivered its final judgment. Adnan Oktar was once again found guilty, but this time receiving an even longer sentence of 8,758 years in prison. The court reaffirmed its findings that Oktar had led a criminal organization engaged in systematic abuse, fraud, and other serious crimes. And now the fate of the cult leader was sealed behind bars. The fall of Adnan Oktar's cult marks the end of one of the most bizarre chapters in Turkey's recent history. In the end, it wasn't the British deep state or any of Oktar's imagined enemies that brought him down. It was the courage of his victims in speaking out, the persistence of investigators, and the weight of his own crimes that finally toppled the empire of Turkey's most infamous cult leader. What do you think about Adnan Oktar's cult? Please leave your thoughts in the comment section. While we wait for Oktar to continue serving his sentence behind bars, why not check out our other cult stories by clicking the card on the screen? If you enjoy our video, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. Thanks for watching, and always remember, beware the leader and never drink the Kool-Aid.